Good morning, everyone. We are excited to have you guys here on our monthly live event that we are hosting specifically for fashion business owners, fashion retail executives. We are really excited to be here. My name is Ye. We're here on the Path to Profit with Ye, and we're going to have a conversation today about agility in action, performing your supply chain, and really how to boost your margins overall. You know, I'd love to just really thank for everyone who are here on our live calls. This is really incredible collaborative atmosphere. So please do send your comments, your questions in. I will try to address them on the call as much as I can. If not, I will definitely follow up back offline with every single one of you guys. I really want you to thank for your time and welcome you to our live webinar that we're going to start right now. My name is Ye, and I do work with fashion businesses as well as fashion retails to build private label brands and really help them as a consultant to get to maximize their profitability and margins. I work with global overall brands as well as more of a smaller starting up brands who we coach and mentor to help them build a great foundational businesses. And this is not a sales call, so don't rush to drop off. This is really more about us sharing the knowledge and the expertise, hopefully giving you guys some ideas what you guys can do and apply in your businesses, and be able to really spark up some really great conversations. Today, we're talking about a very extensive problem, as you guys are all probably experiencing with an uncertain times and tariffs, political, geographical issues that are happening. It's all affecting our supply chain. It's all affecting our profit margins and costs. So we want to really address some of the things that we can do to be able to help us elevate this. Supply chain inefficiencies are really silently eroding your margin by as much as 30%. So if it's not fully efficient or agile, you are most likely leaving money on the table and you are bleeding margin. If your system builds on a kind of stability and really not agility concept, then you are really most likely are and it's affecting most likely your profit margin overall. Maybe you have already upgraded your tech stack, and maybe you already onboarded new suppliers or added PLM. But really, the hard truth of everything is that technology layers over a rigid structure doesn't really solve the root problems of the supply chain overall. You need an agile system from a ground up, especially in today's climate of demand shifts, vitality tariffs, and global cost unpredictability. So, really, let's dive in and kind of unveil some of the solutions and just some of the challenges that a lot of us are experiencing. And I'd love to really start off by talking with a root model problem that most fashions companies and in today's world environment, surprisingly, of consumer product brands or apparel brands are still operate in a traditional push supply chain model where you forecast demand months ahead, commit to large inventory buys, and hope that the product will move, which often then leaves us with excess inventory, tied up cash for 90 to 120 days in the best case scenarios, and really not allowing us to be agile and respond to the demand as quickly as we should, especially when we're having a really great styles that are working and they're performing really well out of the gate. Really, but the model was built in a pre-digital world in a lot of the companies that are existing for many years, and it takes a lot of effort and resources to really step back and look at your supply chain and redo your model and optimize your supply chain. A lot of times we go through a complete supply chain transformation where we have to redesign it and potentially even find and onboard different suppliers who have more of a modular production capabilities that are able to give us the ability to shift to more of a pull model versus a push model. In today's market, really needs the speed. It needs flexibility. And of course, if everything has to be as a data-driven decision. So to really taking about a step back and thinking about what is the pull model, and if you for somebody who is not familiar, the pull model supply chain really means you're producing based on the actual demand signals, no long-term forecasts. So instead of buying 1,000 units up front or 10,000 units up front, if you're a large brand, you would buy, a few hundred units up front or potentially 1,000 units up front for a big brand buys. You analyze your sell-through in real time, and then you will place reorders quickly. Now, the caveat to this solution is that your suppliers or your partners have to be able to have the capabilities to produce within the 14 to 21 day turn and be able to ship it directly to your warehouse in a much quicker manner. So making sure, thinking about whether that's going to be somebody that you can onboard still utilizing Asia if you're primarily manufacturing in Asia, or potentially that might be a model where you have to onboard some suppliers that are closer to your near shore or potentially even domestic to allow you to shorten those lead times. With really thinking about why this really works in this particular environment is because there are a lot of different shifts that have happened in overall last decade and more. D2C channels currently right now giving us already real-time data, but most brands don't use it to drive their production decisions. Tariffs and certainly makes unlocking it really massive production overseas risk. And so thinking about how can you be more agile and be able to bring more smaller batches but more quicker turn, you'll be able to at least respond to the different fluctuations and tariffs that are happening. And hopefully you're also at that time already diversifying your supply chain, like we've talked on multiple of our webinars, which is really critical piece to making sure that you are diversifying, not in the same region, but in different regions, so that hopefully if one region will get affected by tariffs, the other one would potentially have a much easier way for us to be able to work with and then avoid some of this tariffs increases. Retailers are demanding flexibility. So if you are a manufacturing supplier who are primarily supplying wholesale products to your retailers, you know, it's no longer just about the price. They want speed as well. They want to be able to quickly reorder. They don't want to buy large buys up front because that ties up their cash as well. And at the same time, they also want to be able to not be stuck with lots of inventory if the product doesn't sell. So the model to any large retailer to where you can actually do a quick test run and then quickly reorder and fulfill those orders within 21 day maximum to 14, 21 days is actually going to be much more favorable model. And a lot of buyers potentially might give you a higher chance of actually testing your product compared to someone who's still using a traditional model where they would have to commit to large buys even from the first initial test orders as well. What does this really mean for the brands? That if once you transfer your supply chain, and then we don't necessarily say that we have to transfer everything into this particular model, but at least even incremental shifts can already lower your risks by 40 to 60% of initial inventory investment, which is huge. It will also increase your cash flow and lower your warehousing costs, because if you don't have to store 10,000 units for the whole season, and you can actually be able to incrementally bring 1,000 at a time, but move through them within a couple of weeks, you are also saving storage fees that you also have to take into account when you are calculating margin. We often operate on our product margin, which is not actually looking at how much it actually operationally costs for us to store that inventory and handle that inventory, shifting it from one place to the other and so forth. That usually affects our bottom line margins. So when we're looking at, especially from the buyer perspective and from the design department perspective, we often underlook those costs, and we are hyper focused on initial product margin, but then at the end we are actually bleeding margin when we're calculating the net. great responsiveness to the market signals, really allowing your margin protection overall. As giving you an example, one of our clients who was about 60 million in revenue, women's brand, was consistently overproducing. After we mapped their entire supply chain, we really restructured their buys into 3 short-term chase windows within a season, instead of doing one big bulk buy for the season itself. And if they sold out of that style, they had to wait for the next season to be able to bring it back because of their traditional supply chain. When we shifted it to the pool supply chain, we were able to now, within 2 seasons, reduce their access inventory by 48%. And we were able to increase their margins by 18%. I mean, this is huge. I really would love to hear from you guys, whether you are, this is relatable to your situation, and as well as if you are experiencing any of those type of challenges. I would love to hear from you guys. Please put your comments. We are broadcasting this live on multiple platforms, so I do get to be able to see all of your inputs. And if you are watching this on the replay, we'd love for you to also get your feedback, and then as well as your comments too. So feel free to share them. We will respond to every single one of them. Really thinking about the dynamic of, where do we go next from here, and how do we able to solve some of our supply chain issues by really thinking it slightly different and then what we've done in mostly traditional way. Great question, Mary. Thank you so much thank you. I'm starting to see some of the questions are coming in. Let me address some of them. Mary, really good question. She's asking, what if our factory partners refuse short-term orders? This is a really good question, and it could potentially hurt your existing supply chain in a way where you might need to diversify and might need to diversify to my quicker. So this is why we always say, don't just have a supplier and treat them as a vendor, but partner with them so that you can understand their capabilities and potentially even guide them towards the different path of we're potentially creating modular production runs so that they could be able to support some of the at least some of the partial production of your product in the pool's supply chain way. Really start by shifting only a portion of your line. We'd never recommend to immediately jump in and change your complete supply chain from traditional push to pull. Test the pull model for really best sellers or the seasonal capsules. I mean, pull model is fantastic for your new products that you are actually testing, because you don't then have to invest so much in inventory and potentially be stuck. So you're actually creating yourself a lower risk test runs that you could be able to quickly respond to and find new winners. And this is a phenomenal way for us to be able to really diversify our assortment as we're starting to grow and develop the brand, but more and much more safer way. Now, if you are having your best sellers and you already have your winners, that doesn't mean that they should always stay in the push. They also probably need some of the pull system so that you can be able to get into reorders much quicker. So that if you did end up peaked at the season and you end up selling through all the inventory that you projected and bought, you need to be able to jump into it and actually replenish it so that you don't leave that potential revenue on the table. Test when you're testing your pool model, it's also going to be also testing to make sure that the partners that you are partnering to do this pool model with are actually able to deliver quality product, actually able to deliver within timeframes that they're quoting, and be able to also iron out some kinks that potentially can come up as you are starting to do some of the shifts. Use data to show your suppliers how it will lead to really consistent smaller orders versus one big gamble. Because one of the other things that manufacturers understand, that if they have produced a large order for you which did not move or sold, the chances and likelihood of you coming back and ordering more from them are almost none to zero. And so when we are positioning ourselves again, not just as, hey, we're going to treat you as a vendor and buy product from you, but hey, we want to build a long-term relationship. We want to build business and partnerships together so that it could be able to benefit both businesses. So we can be both in win-win situation. They want consistency. Manufacturers want consistency because they need to keep their pipeline going, right? They want to make sure that they're constantly full at capacity and don't have the fluctuations of seasons where they're super busy 3 months out of the year and then they're scraping for orders the rest of the time. So having that ability to show them that with the pool system, you're actually able to consistently order throughout the year and don't have so many dips within their capacity, that also could potentially spark up a more favorable conversation. Mary, I hope this kind of gives you some ideas. I got thumbs up. Thank you so much. I'm really glad that this was helpful. Sam, thank you for your question. Sam is asking, isn't a pool model risky for new product launches? It's a fantastic questions. Really, the key is launching with controlled MOQ and running tight marketing tests per launch. You don't need to massive volume to validate, right? It's about how fast and at low risk testing and the durations that you could be able to do. Now, the challenge you would have as a new brand is to be able to build that trust within the supplier to be able for them to say, yes, we want to do a pool model. Now, there are phenomenal systems and solutions that have came on in the last few years. One of them is Patchwork, and they're phenomenal at doing exactly what we're talking about today, where they integrate with your shop, they predict your demand, they produce towards that prediction of demand within 14 to 21 days. They now diversified it, now that no longer they're producing in China, but they're also producing in Vietnam, shifting also into Cambodia. So to be able to really deliver the superior results and then minimize the risks of the different tariffs that are potentially coming at risk within the next few months again. So thinking about, finding those partners and seeing how that can integrate into your overall supply chain model is going to be very critical, and be able to then build that trust within them based on your projections, or maybe potentially based on some of the early tests that you have done and reads where you can actually show them that, yes, our product does sell. With more testing that we can do, we can also identify the winners, and then those winners are going to be a long-term product for us that which will define our core. So having those conversations with the right partners are definitely going to be challenging. It's at some if you're just starting up, but it's not impossible. So it has been done, and it's definitely there's avenues to do to get that executed. Really phenomenal question that just came in as well. How do we forecast a pull model if our sales team still wants to have upfront numbers? So, and that's a really great question, and it's a really big challenge, especially when we are really working with brands who are working with lots of other retailers, and be able to work with sales reps so that they will need to know what their projection numbers are, so that they could be able to plan for it. So in this case, what we highly recommend is to use a hybrid forecast model. A core placeholder really bases on the holistic data, but your real plan is flexible and includes about 2 to 3 rebuy gates based on actual demand. So you're really not forecasting at that time, you're really just adjusting live. So yes, you do have a more or less upfront forecast number that you will share to your sales teams and potentially to even your suppliers. But then that number is broken out into small deliveries and small test runs that you can again adjust as you go. So as you see the early reads of your demand, you should be able to adjust that within days to be able to get your next reorder within the next 14 to 21 days. Hopefully that answers. I got that. Really, thank you for your thumbs up. I'm really glad this was useful. Please do share more questions as they arise. I will try to continuously to address them, but let's dive into a second pillar of really agility as really an execution. And a pull model only works if you can actually produce fast at low MOQs and stay profitable. So this is where it's critical to find those right factories and manufacturers who can actually understand that model and are set up to be able to produce in a modular way. This is the only way to be able to support, in this case, pool model. Really, there is a cost myth that we constantly hear when we start to transform the supply chain from push to pull. And many brands that we work with, they have this assumption that if it's a low MOQ, that equals to a high unit cost, which equals to the low margin. And yes, it does equal to potential a low initial product margin. But as we talked about, we got to also look deeper and really need to look at your complete net profit margin, overall, after you take all the warehouse fees and operational fees and everything that it takes for you to handle the inventory that comes in and you actually have to store for a really long time. And also got to look at how that impacts your cash flow overall. So when we are shifting to agile model, really we are able to recoup the margin in other areas outside of just product cost itself, because we are seeing fewer write-offs, we're seeing lower warehousing fees, we're seeing fast cash turns, and we really end the season with no liquidation of inventory because you've been producing to the actual demand. You should not, if you are in a pull model, you do it right, there should be almost no inventory that's left that you would have to liquidate, which also is a big chunk that really contributes to your net profit margin. Fast production actually in reality will end up equaling a higher net profit margin. Even within 14 to 21 day cycles, we're not just trying to tie up our cash for and eliminate the tie up of our cash for 120 days plus if we're doing a traditional model, but instead we're really turning the best sellers while the demand is hot, which we actually maximizing the potential to our revenue growth. And this is where we often see as well with the traditional models, where we end up leaving the sales and money on the table because we were not able to be fully in stock when the actual that particular item was hot and still in demand. So thinking about how do that really impacts your overall net profit margin is potentially could not only shift some of the buy-ins from your stakeholders, but also helps you to really have the strategic conversations with your existing factories, supply chains, as well as potentially diversifying to others that you could be able to support both models. Really thinking about that low MQs are possible only when you bundle a repeat style fabric. So this is another thing that we have to really constantly remind the brands is that you cannot just go into a pool model thinking that you're going to be able to create one of a kind items that constantly pull in different fabric resources, trims. It's not going to be feasible for production because there's still challenges from the manufacturing side that they still have to commit to a color, a fabric dye lot per color, which sometimes can be up to 1,200 yards. So what this really means is that when you're committing to a particular fabric or a grouping of styles that can feed through that fabric on a pool model, they most likely going to have that fabric sitting in stock that they are pulling from into your demand, so that if one style did not perform, you don't actually end up leaving this fabric unused, and which then the vendor will lose money and he has to liquidate. You are constantly could potentially reuse that fabric in a other style that potentially did much better than one of your others. So think about a group of 3 items as an example that feeds out of the same fabric, same color. So you're testing all 3, and then potentially one doesn't do well, one does okay, and then the third one is actually a winner. So which then with the repool model, you'll continuously replenish from that stock of the fabric. And then once that stock gets to a certain threshold, then the factory has to restock that fabric again. And so you're continuously moving forward with that model so that it becomes a win-win on the manufacturing side and a win-win on your end as a brand and or as a retailer who's doing a private label. So thinking about those ideas of how you can partner again with your factories and brainstorm what would be potentially right styles to put them into this model, where potentially some of the other styles might still stay within the push model at the moment. You forecast total season volume as well, really not per style, and negotiating really across the line itself. So this is a different way of conversation and negotiations that are happening, because we're no longer saying, hey, we want you to give us a price break based on this large volume that we're ordering at a time. You got to really be able to show the vendor, the suppliers that you're working with, the overall volume of your line that you're going to produce with them on the pull model, and what are the potential growth, and be able to, what are the cap, right, for that particular season that you're projecting that you're going to reach across those multiple styles. And as long as they feed out of the same fabric colors and they are grouped, it is going to be feasible and it's achievable. You really, with this pool model, also offering a supplier stability in exchange of flexibility. So that should be a really one of the important key points that you need to drive home when you're having negotiations with your supplier. One of our clients who was a global resort wear brand, we worked with them to drop their MOQ from 600 to 120 units by grouping fabric commitments and using an original MTO supplier. So what really happened was that they were producing initially out of Asia with really large volume, and they had to bring in every style, and they would continuously have a lot of excess inventory. So what we end up doing is we actually diversified their supply chain, and found regional suppliers that are actually able to support the same fabric, same colors, as well as the same quality product, but they were able to do it on a pool model and be able to do that on the 14 to 21 day turns. So what we end up doing is we end up splitting our assortment into between those two suppliers. And what some of the newer styles, we actually kept it with the original supplier so that we could be able to test them. We reordered, using a pull model. Once we got to the style where we transitioned it to be our core into that brand, then we were then to actually putting that style back into the push model, because then it was a risk-free investment. We knew that this product will sell. We knew what the demand was. We can now leverage the higher product margins by going back to push. So we strategically worked in between the two models, having the two flexibility of the two suppliers that can work interchangeably. And what this really did, it reduced their upfront investment by 1.2 million in a single season. And that's huge, because that opens up your cash that you could be able to invest back in the business, invest more into marketing to drive more sales. So this is a really great way of carving out some of that cash, to be able to actually utilize that cash throughout your season in different variations so that it can maximize your ROI. And they really end up the year with the highest net margin in the company history. So just to show you guys that that transition really does work, and it potentially could allow you to be able to actually become more profitable on the bottom line. Phenomenal question. Mary, thank you for asking this question. This is the second question I'm getting from you. I'm really glad that you're being so engaging and asking those questions. Thank you. Won't my unit cost go up if I lower my MOQs? Possibly it will, but your true landed cost is what matters. And if you're lowering your risk and avoiding inventory, sitting in a warehouse for 8 months, as an example, your total profitability will go up. If you are reducing the amount of handling that has to happen back and forth, because one of the other pitfall that we often see with especially fast growing companies and brands is that they end up have to produce much more what they actually anticipated, because they took off and they're actually doing really well, but now they have no place to put this inventory in. And by the time they're figuring out the warehouse and what they're going to do with another 3PL, what do they often do is they get containers, they put them in the parking lot, they put the inventory in those containers. Now, as the their inventory starts to deplete a little bit, they start to move that inventory from containers back into the warehouse. Now, every time you touch that inventory, you're bleeding the money. And it's a lot of times where that money and that the money that you actually bleed that associates with those transitions are not often monitored as well. And so you might not even see it until, and it kind of blind spots you until when you actually start to do all your financials and end of the quarters, and now you're realizing that, hey, this actually really impacted my net profit margin. So the more you can avoid that, the better it is for you. Hopefully this was helpful. Thank you, Mary. I'm really glad that this was really good insight for you guys. Another fantastic question just came in. How do I get suppliers to agree to lower MOQ without damaging relationship? It's all about the total value you bring. Using volume across season or across multiple SKUs will bring them into the partners, not vendors with you, right? They will make your forecasting more transparent. And at the same time, they will be able to then come up with the solutions of how they can provide you that agility and then that flexibility. Now, I will be very honest that every manufacturer is set up to be able to actually support pull model. So if you're having those conversations and you're realizing that that particular partner that you're working with is not capable to do it, it doesn't mean you have to completely abandon that partner and move away from him. But what that means is that it just means that you need to diversify. You need to find another suppliers that are able to do it, preferably in a different region, and that you could be able to then split your buys and then be able to figure out what portion of the assortment will be handled by factory A and what portion of the assortment will be handled by factory B. And like I mentioned earlier, you can use them interchangeably, right? Depending on if you've proven the style and now you're confident that the style will sell, then you can go back to your factory A who does a push model and then place bulk orders so that you can, again, maximize your product margin as well. Another great question that just came in. We manufacture overseas. Can we still do fast production? Yes. If you build regional partnerships or dual sourcing for key styles, then yes, the answer is that you can do it. Many agile brands now really split their core production overseas and roll capsule or chasing kind of in the regional or near shoring suppliers that they have within their portfolio, with their supply chain portfolio. You don't need to shift 100%. It's just enough to stay responsive to the demand and the market. It's just enough to be able to shift some of your high risk items that you're potentially not sure if you're going into a new product category, if you are developing and expanding your line in different product class that you potentially have never carried before. Those would be a great way to start with the pull model, and then potentially you can transition back. Now, thinking about, the reality of the situation that we're in today. Tariffs and trade instability is a real thing. We're all talking about it. We're all trying to come up with a solution. We're all talking about the diversification of our supply chain. We're all talking about the different methods that we can potentially stay ahead of this curve that is constantly changing. It's constantly messing up with all of our supply chains. So really the best way for us is to be able to be proactive, and figuring out ahead of time, what do we need to do to have a plan A, plan B, and plan C. You're seeing more frequent tariff adjustments, and they're going to be more coming, but particularly on goods coming from Asia. So if you are a brand that primarily manufactures in Asia, or especially in China, this is really fast to start to think about what can be done to diversify. If your model requires you to lock in a production 6 months ahead, in a country that might potentially facing tariffs brutality, you're really going to be exposed, because the orders that you're placing today for the 6 months ahead at one tariff rate, and then if that tariff potentially drops, then you will end up bleeding money and leaving money on the table. So it's really going to be critical, as well as if you are projecting, you placing your orders, again, so far in advance, and that particular you know tariff goes back up, then by the time you actually need to ship those goods, then again you are at risk right now that you're going to be bleeding a lot of money on the table because that's going to affect your product margin. So thinking about if we able to shorten our cycle time and reorder time, we could be able to close, or at least work within the what's happening within tariffs, what's happening within the geographical and political aspect that are affecting our supply chains, and do those shifts as quickly as possible, if you have that established supply chain already. Thinking of kind of strategic shifts, really, it's moving from agile, moving agile supply chain that can shift production location fast without overhauling the entire structure. So having, like I mentioned to you, potentially dual partners that can interchangeably work with one another is a great solution, and that would be the ideal solution, and preferably that they are in completely different parts of the world. Sourcing is no longer just about the cost, but it's really about the control of your lead times, the control of your costs of goods that you're locking in based on which you're creating retail prices for the season, control of your cash flow, right? So that you could be able to utilize that cash instead of tying it up into inventory that takes you months to burn through. you know, Brands are really creating tariffs resilience by sourcing hubs across multiple regions. In a real world kind of example that would love to show you guys, based on one of our clients who was a mid-size accessory brand, and they were producing about 90% of their product in China. They restructured to move 40% of their production to Vietnam and Mexico split, which really resulted them, when their new tariffs hit, they saved almost 400,000 in duty by avoiding the price hikes in retail. And they were able to maintain their retail costs prices, to their customer. And that's a big win, because the next thing that we never really talk about is that when those fluctuations happen and brands have to recuperate by increasing retail, they potentially going to have a drop off at their customer and the buys overall, because while all that happening, the budgets of their customers are not growing, and so they're actually reducing, because now they have to spend money on more money on the same product or lifestyle that they currently have. And so when that happens, it really affects the brand and the actual trust within that brand by the consumer. So if you do absolutely have to increase retails, you have to do it very slightly and incrementally, so that you could be able to kind of prepare your customer and be able to make it as seamless as possible, so that it's not so visible to them that there was a big price increase. And even if you have to take a hit at the beginning, it's better to take a hit on a margin than taking a hit on your customer and customer retention rate, right? Because you want that customer to come back to your brand. Remember, I always constantly say it's easy to find, probably first client to come and buy it once from you, but it's much harder for that client to retain that client, so that with that customer, so that they can come and repetitively buy from you year over year, continuously. And that's where we want to make sure that we preserve. And able to, again, making those type of shifts is going to be very critical. I'm going to take a few last questions, because we are kind of coming to the end of our discussion. Again, thank you for everyone who's sending the questions. I will respond to the questions that I have not addressed on this call offline. I do diligently respond to all of them, so as you're watching replays, do also please send your questions in the comments. We will respond to them. What if I can't afford to create multiple sourcing hubs? You don't need to have dozens of them. So when we talk about the diversification and kind of multiple sourcing hubs, we're really starting with one alternative to your high-end margin and high-risk SKUs. So you not even need to right now scramble and say, okay, I need to diversify for everything I have. You identify what are the 20% that drives 80% of your business, and then what are the out from there, where are they going to be the highest margin and the highest risks potentially that you could put, which are potentially newer styles that you have not tested. Build relationships now so that you can pivot fast when the tariff shifts. So again, don't wait till the problem occurs. Start diversifying, start building those relationships, start doing some test orders to make sure that everything is ready and they have everything developed so that when the shift has to happen or the pivot has to happen, it's a very quick, just by placing a PO, and then they can go from there. So they need to be all set up on that end as well. Because if you're starting to do that when you're already in a problem zone, then you are actually just reacting instead of being proactively investing in your business and security and making sure that you'll be able to be resilient through this hard times. How do you convince leadership that paying a bit more for flexibility is worth it? This is a fantastic question, and as executive and we see a lot of this push and pull between the stakeholders within the company, especially when from the leadership perspective. They but it all often ties into your overall company KPIs and how you're being tracked on, right? Are you tracked on margin? Are you tracked on revenue? Are you tracked on how much cash flow you have? So a lot of those impacts potentially can impact those conversations. So understanding what your company overall KPIs and what you're being tracked on, and building a case study that really shows them that how tariff savings and inventory risk mitigation offsets any small COGS increase. Showing and potentially prove the concept with one or two SKUs so that you can really show data to prove what you guys are pitching to the leadership in terms of the cost savings. Don't assume that you're going to save all those costs. You got to test it out, because depending on your relationship, depending on your partnerships and suppliers, sometimes it works exactly how you envision, sometimes it doesn't, and sometimes you have to make pivots in order for it to work that way. So really, agility becomes your insurance policy and increasing your competitive edge, and that's really critical for any growing brand. Does this mean we should move everything near shore? Like I mentioned before already in this call, it's not necessary. It's about a hybrid sourcing, balancing cost, speed, and risk. So nearshoring part of your mix gives you a buffer, but it's not a total replacement. You will still potentially need to have your bulk partners with the push traditional supply chain, because then they can deliver you the highest margins. But you want to do that with styles that are proven, that are going to sell, that you're not going to be stuck with inventory on. And then you would always have a backup supplier that you're assuring that can potentially fulfill your any demand that if you ran out of stock sooner than what you anticipated. So, I would love to just wrap up our conversation by just summarizing some of the key things and elements of what we just have learned, and really thinking about the push versus pull model, thinking about how you're going to structure those conversations with your potential partners. We are also thinking about, how do I even start this type of project within my organization? As you're probably listening to this conversation, you're thinking, well, how can I apply this to my business? And what we really would love to just say that you want to start with auditing your end-to-end supply chain. You want to identify your top margin leaks, right? Where are the most highest risk and potential where you're leaking the margin? Design a custom agility blueprint that will allow you to really identify the areas of improvement and opportunities and what type of SKUs you potentially would want to shift, and most importantly, in which regions you really need to be at in order for you to be able to get the quick turnarounds, fast way to ship the product and get it into your warehouses, or potentially even shipping it directly to your consumer. Help you prepare for what's next is really allows you to work with consultants without actually tying on your resources. you know our company, as an example, myself as well, we do supply chain resilience diagnostics for the brands, where we go through what we just talked about. We go through the audit, we go through identifying the top margin leaks, we identify the opportunities, we are designing the supply chain for agility, potentially sometimes even redesigning. We help to source appropriate partners and vendors and make those partnerships happen. So if you guys are interested, or potentially most importantly, if you just want to brainstorm some other solutions to whatever the challenge you are dealing with today, again, let us know. We will drop a link to my calendar in the comments as well, so that you could also be able to just book a free discovery call with myself, where we're going to go over some of your challenges. I will do my very best to provide value on every call, to give you some ideas, but we build roadmap, and then we take it from there. So hopefully this was really resonating. We are excited for our next event that is happening on July 24th. It always happens on a Thursday at 10 a.m. Pacific Standard Time. We're going to be talking about the science of building high performing assortments. So we're going to be talking about merchandising. So if you are a merchant, or if you're kind of looking into building or growing your brand, and or need optimization in your merchandising strategies, that would be a phenomenal live event for you to join. So that please do register on our company page at Yushkova Design, so that you could be able to get the reminders when those calls are going to be coming in. Thank you, everyone. We're really excited. If you do like what you hear, if you would like us to continue this type of conversations and webinars, please give us thumbs up. Let us know in comments that if whether this was helpful, or whether potentially there is a certain topic you want us to discuss to help you overcome some of your challenges. We're here to help. We're here to grow with you. We're here to learn from one another, and we're really excited to really get you guys on the path of profitability. Thank you very much. My name is Ye, and I look forward to seeing you guys next month.